DWAR of Waw was the third of the 9 Nazgûl, also known as the Dock Lord, the Black Hunter, or Morgomir. He was the third in command among the 9 too. Only fragmented written records had preserved an old legend about him, a mighty lord from the southeastern lands. Off the coast of the eastern lands of Middle-earth were several islands, each one supporting its own people and tribe. Like many realms of men at the time of the Second Age, the islands were at battle with one another for land and power, though the dividing seas made raids difficult and less frequent than their captains intended. On one of the lesser islands there was the quiet community of Waw, their land known as the Isle of Docks by many, for the people of Waw used their hounds in battle, and many of their deities were in dog form. A man called DWAR, meaning Dwarf of the clan Dendra, was born in Horm on Waw, the Isle of the Docks, at the end of the second millennium of the Second Age. His early life proved difficult, for he was the son of a simple Walish fisherman, and he was forced to work since the age of 7. The labor hardened him for the trials to come, and kept his mind off his mother Umbriel, who died during his birth. Taciturn and melancholy, the young fisherman nevertheless nurtured a boundless ambition that grew with him and determined his bitter fate. His island seemed cramped to him, and he wanted to explore the coasts of Middle-earth, which, in the clear summer dawns, were visible from the boat where he worked. When he was but 16 years of age, the fierce warriors known as the Kprur from the powerful island Hent landed on Waw, and, after a bitter struggle, burned the villages, including Horm, to the ground, leaving many of the defenders dead upon the battlefields. Then Kprur ships savagely stalked the Walish fishermen vessels, and sank all but a few that reached safe hiding in the sea caves in the cliffs of Waw's western coast. Young Dwar, his brother Dwem, and his father Dendravim found refuge in the quarries that stretched beneath the cliffs of the west coast, together with the last survivors, and later escaped on just 3 small boats, but a javelin wound cost Wim his life several weeks later. Dwar pledged to avenge the attack on his people and the murder of his beloved father. Realizing that his own people possessed neither the skill nor the arms to defeat Hent, Dwar sailed northward. After some time they reached the mainland and found that a man named Comul had forged a great empire there, welcoming any to his cause. With little choice, Dwar and his people joined the empire and set up a new tribe upon the shores, calling it Vol, or Ashes of Vengeance, in their tongue. There Dwar learned the ways of the forest and the fields, and became an able warrior too. The young man served in Comul's campaigns against the Bröden and Stan peoples to the east. In a short time he gained great fame among those people, for he had become a fierce and relentless warrior. He rose to become a scout, working with the trained warhounds that cast fear into the lightly armed enemies of his mentors. He learned the arts of speech and command necessary to tame the ferocious warhounds that terrorized warriors of Hent, whose bodies were protected by light leather armor only. However, although Dwar was considered by his comrades to be a brave warrior, he had not stopped there, aspiring rather to obtain knowledge such as never a man of his lineage had learned. Recruiting several masters of battle, Dwar began to train his people into a mighty force, intent on crushing the evil Kprur and their Isle of Hent. Although his people became expertly attuned to war, Dwar felt more was needed to defeat the Kprur. His fascination with warcraft pressed him to seek even more powerful means of exacting his revenge, and around the end of the second millennium of the Second Age, he entered an arcane school devoted to the ancient magical arts. For 20 years he studied under Embraslil, an elderly priest of the cult of Morgoth, an attuned spellweaver, and the last apprentice of Jadashala. The young magician applied himself in studies of dark arts, demonstrating a talent which few of the second-born could boast of possessing. When Embra believed Dwar had risen to his expectation, Embrasil mysteriously vanished, leaving no trace of his sudden vanishing. Thus Dwar became a mage, Lord of Dogs, and so he left the school. Now Dwar believed he was ready to begin the invasion of Hent, and without much ado sailed with his forces from Worl, returning to Waw. Surrounded by a small but capable contingent, he wrested the citadel of Alkwaw from the Krur overseer, establishing a foothold on the remote peninsula in southeastern Waw. Krur warriors besieged the hold, but packs of huge dogs roamed the surrounding woods and kept them at bay for over a year. Attempts to burn the forest failed, and a series of disquieting supernatural events sowed discord among the attackers. After 2 years of being surrounded in the citadel, Dwar ordered his fighters to break the siege, and in the dead of night sent his warriors forth into battle. Operating in conjunction with nearly 2,000 warhounds, and catching the slumbering Krur off guard and unawares, Dwar's forces swept through the island, leaving a trail of bloodshed wherever they passed. They smashed the Krur line and scattered the army that had occupied War for many years. The island was reconquered within a month. Unfortunately for the Dwellim, Dwar established himself as the High Lord of their isle and refused to reconvene the elder councils. He became known as the Dog King. Waw became the Isle of Dogs, the domain of the Dog King, and no one dared defy his harsh edicts. Dwar tightened his control in the ensuing years, making Horm a monumental port and turning the southwestern forest into a preserve for his hounds. Yet, despite his father having been avenged, Dwar set his greedy eyes on the surrounding lands, not content with having fulfilled his oath, for his ambition had become great, and it now measured itself by virtue of the achievements he foresaw to obtain. At that time, a day had come when Dwar was approached by a shadowy robed figure, unarmed, but carrying an air of menace with him. The figure said, "So, you are the mighty Dwar. Your old master still told me about you. I can sense your hatred and desire for power within you. It gives you strength. Give me the word, and I will give you mighty gifts to achieve lordship of all these islands, and perhaps more." Dwar, startled at first by the offer, gladly accepted, blind to the dark path he had taken. The figure simply smiled, and, as mysteriously as he had come, disappeared into the gloom. In order to satiate his desire for power and vengeance, however, the Dog King proclaimed that he was heir to all the surrounding islands and coastal realms, notably the peninsular kingdom of Hent to the north. His rights constructed a fleet during the next year, and for the next 13 years, starting just 3 years after his victory over the Krur, the Dog warriors pillaged port towns and terrorized the coast for hundreds of miles. Within a few years, Wall, Broad, and Hent fell under his control, and soon Dendra's power had spread throughout the far east of Middle-earth. To show everyone his greatness, Dwar set up his palace upon Hent and proclaimed himself as High Lord of the Isles. Many of the islands still did not submit to his rule, but Dwar had a strong backing. When his forces made no progress, he called upon help from the mysterious figure. Soon a host of creatures named orcs crossed the sea to Hent, saying that their great master had sent them to help him achieve victory over the islands. And so, in the years that followed, all islands that defied Dwar's rule were overwhelmed by the might of his allied army and the hordes of orcs. In such a way were all of the islands between Waw and the mainland, as well as the great Avar Elven Isle of Ki-Moniemor to the south, incorporated into Dwar's kingdom. Though the firstborn warned Dwar of allowing his power to consume himself, the arrogant lord did not heed their warnings. A few decades have passed, and the elves still continued to protest against Dwar, and even turned to more hostile acts, such as sinking his ships that came too close to Ki-Moniemor. Furious, Dwar amassed his navy and prepared to overrun the isle, but continuous storms prevented any kind of attack on Ki-Moniemor, and it became apparent that an assault on the elves was impossible, for it seemed that the sea itself protected the firstborn. Therefore, Dwar decided to let the elves be, for a time, and turned to ordering his fractious empire, because the rebellion of elves had inspired many islands to rise up, and the chaos of raids, plunder, and war took over. As Dwar's empire crumbled, he himself grew old and wearied. Yet the mysterious figure who had visited him at hand returned, offering him a magical ring, the third of the 9 mortal rings, saying that it would give him immortality and power incarnate. Dwar gladly accepted, and though he saved himself from death, he in turn, by receiving the ring, had delivered his soul. Yet now, with renewed power, Dwar crushed the islands that still defied him, one by one. None were spared, for Dwar, or the Dog King, as his foes called him, after the isle of his origin, had no mercy left in him. Only Ki-Moniemor was spared from his onslaught, for the storms that halted his fleets still raged about the isle. Nevertheless, the Lord of Dogs reached the height of his power. Then Dendradwar vanished, his soul consumed by greed and hatred. The will of the Dark Lord seethed through DWAR of Waw by means of the ring of power he accepted with the offer of immortality from Sauron of Mordor. Although his armies conquered the whole land and laid waste to its structures and populace alike, the Dog King was nowhere to be seen. Dwar's nephew Dendrasvip assumed the mantle of Lord of Dogs during the celebration of the victory his uncle had savored most. But Dwar remained in Waw, despite his apparent demise, for another 252 years. During this era, he manipulated the line of his heirs and ruled from the shadows, while residing in the solitude of Alkwo. The years brought unceasing wars, as the folk of the Isle of Dogs pursued continual campaigns of plunder and conquest. Only after Dwar's departure for Mordor, in the middle of the 3rd century of the 3rd millennium of the Second Age, were the elves able to liberate the islands from Dwar's followers, and soon his empire crumbled, leaving a relative peace upon his old lands. In the meantime, Dwar arrived to Barad-dûr, where he found that the shadowy figure was indeed Sauron himself, and that he was eternally bound to the Dark Lord. For the next 1,000 years, Dwar lived at Barad-dûr in the Black Land, where he slowly fell into the Shadow World, while breeding the beasts of Sauron, the werewolves of Mordor. The chief of his designs being a new breed of wolf, known to most ever after as the Wargs. Although the offsprings of his labors haunted Middle-earth for centuries to come, the culmination of his work awaited a later day. When the Númenóreans of Ar-Pharazôn captured Sauron, Dwar fled back to Waw. It has been a fair time since he has last travelled into the far east, to the isles that sat beyond on Middle-earth's southeast corner. Even now Dwar wondered how Sauron found him, a warlord among the countless that he no doubt passed while travelling as far as he had. Something within his soul told him his was a cruel fate, one that only the Valar could have waived in their lacking vigilance, a skull twisted on a ghostly visage that no mortal eye could ever see, the face of a man aged yet youthful, leathered skin and lips covered by a beard that had no warmth any more. No, he earned his ring, his precious band of jewel and masterful artisan, and the elves and Maya maid in waiting for one worth it. And Waw strengthened his position, which diminished a little bit during his long absence. Wurlim had become a powerful empire that consumed the southeast again, and by his descendants his long oath remained in their name. The Dog King came back to Mordor a year after Sauron escaped the downfall of Númenor, and returned to Barad-dûr. Dwar immediately resumed his work, preparing for the coming struggle against the Dúnedain successor states of Arnor and Gondor. The war of the last alliance of elves and men claimed the lives of the finest of Dwarf's foul hounds. Most perished at Dagorlat, others died in the defense of Mordor, or were hunted down by the elves and Dúnedain in nearby hills. Ular and Elia, as they were called by the High Elves, followed the fate of Sauron, so when Barad-dûr was conquered, and his master fell at the hands of Isildur, losing the ruling ring in the process, the Lord of Dogs passed with his dark master into the shadows together with the other Ringwraiths. The reformed and awakened war was called from his formless wonder in the 11th century of the Third Age, when he, Sauron, and Camil passed into the east, where they began to forge the Easterling Empire. Yet, when they attempted to awaken several Balrogs from the mountains of the east, the Blue Wizards cast them away. After this failure, the Dark Lord and his two Ringwraiths went to Dol Guldur. Dwar stayed in the Mirkwood fortress for a few months at the side of Sauron, but then returned to the eastern islands, to his home, to Waw. Finding that the elves' influence had spread through most of the isles, Dwar was furious. Once again assuming his place as the ultimate power of Waw, the Dog King incited his kinsmen to rebel against the extremely strong, but relatively benevolent, yoke of Lochasdrus. Using his eternal powers, he raised the spirits of some of his long-deceased servants, called thereafter Xprur, from their slumber. Then he proceeded to hand at the head of his new wraith escort. Finding his old palace on hand in ruin, he began to take control of one island at a time, slaying the lord and his family of each tribe, thus bringing the tribesmen under his sway. Once he had sufficient servants available, Dwar's palace was rebuilt, and he named it Xaxpror, meaning Fortress of the Damned. There he resided for the next 600 years. His next step was to regain his iron grip of the islands. He forced the island inhabitants to take oaths of fealty to him, and any who disobeyed had the Xprur dispatched against them. In such a way was Dwar able to complete the rebuild of his empire. In 400 years he was even able to send settlers to Kimoniemor, the island of the firstborn. Though the storms about the Elven Isle were still strong, Dwar, encouraged by the progress of settlers, sent ship after ship into the waters, the entirety of his fleet attempting to cross the treacherous waves in the end. After a long and wearisome crossing, under half of Dwar's fleet survived the ordeal, though his remaining forces were still vast. Some stories say that after the successful landing, Ulmo, the sea god himself, visited Dwar, warning him not to enter Kimoniemor and spread Sauron's stain upon the firstborn. The legend of Waw says that Dwar stood defiant, telling Ulmo to be gone, that it matters not whether he, Ulmo, is a god, no more would it matter if he were a peasant. His foolish little elves will be crushed. For there stands Dwar, and this is his empire. And here he is the god. After this, Ulmo disappeared in a short burst of a sea storm, staying his wrath for a while though. If this is what really happened, no one can be sure, but the truth is that shortly after the landing on Kimoniemor, Dwar stopped his advance and waited. In the meantime, his own island of Waw declared itself independent. Ironically, then DWAR II, one of Dwar's descendants, refounded the independence of the kingdom. Now, Dwar, angry and feeling invincible, ordered the elimination of all Keymoniumor's inhabitants. With the explorer at their head, the men of the Isles ravaged through Keymoniumor, slaying every elf in their path. With only a few allied warriors, the firstborn could not withstand Dwar's onset, and soon every elf upon that once blessed isle was slain, leaving Keymoniumor stained with sin and blood. Seeing the extent of the Dog King's evil, Ulmo called for the wrath of the waters, and the sea rose up in a terrible storm. One by one the isles of the east were swept by the sea, and such was the power of the waves that no ship could survive. The war risked his own destruction as his empire sank around him. But from the south came Uwata, who sensed his peril, riding upon the back of the dragon Kitrarox, which he and Indur had defeated and tamed deep in Harat. Thus was the Dog King saved by the dragon from the drowning islands and returned to the solid dry land. With his lifelong work destroyed at its climax, Dwar had no reason to stay in the east, and when Sauron recalled him back to Mordor, he obeyed. The Dog King went into Mordor with the other Ulairi and began to prepare the realm for Sauron's eventual re-emergence. Dwar remained in Mordor, breeding horrible lines of war dogs until the beginning of the third millennium of the Third Age, when he participated in the Nazgûl capture of Minas Ithil. He lodged in the western sentry tower of the captured capital of Ithilien for 36 years before moving again. Though his own empire was destroyed, the Dog King followed Sauron and Camul eastward during the Watchful Peace. His exploits carried him for 900 years across the southeastern Middle-earth, where he continued his age-old effort to subjugate the peoples of those rich lands. Contested by the Blue Wizards, Alatar and Palando, his success was somewhat mixed. When he departed for the west again, much remained undone. Dwar returned to Mordor when Sauron abandoned Dol Guldur and re-entered the Black Land. The Nazgûl took a hold at Minas Morgul and joined the rebuilding of Barad-dûr that now began in earnest. When his work there ended, he returned to breeding wolves and hounds. After centuries of relative dormancy, Dwar went to Erebor, where it was him who offered Sauron's friendship to the dwarfs of the Lonely Mountain and the men of Dale and Esgaroth. He was refused, but retaliated by bringing Easterlings into the region, claiming King Bran's southern holds for Sauron. Dwar's next task, like those of the other Ringwraiths, focused on recovering the ruling ring. In the assault upon Osgiliath that triggered the War of the Ring, he and the other 6 that dwelt at Minas Morgul crossed the Great River and met the 2 Nazgûl from Dol Guldur. Then he accompanied his fellow Black Riders into the Anduin Valley. After hunting for Gollum and the Shire along the Vales of Anduin, Rohan, and the Gap of Isen, they received information from Wormtongue and soon entered Eriador. When the group split along the road through the lost kingdom of Cardolan, he went north with the Witch King and 4 others through Andrat to Bree, and after defeating the guard of rangers, they passed into Bree land, searching about the borders of the Shire for information. They passed through Bree itself upon different roads, and 5 days later he, Hoarmurath, and the Witch King raided Krigg Hollow, where the Ring-bearer was supposedly housed. Yet they did not find him, though gained news of Gandalf passing through Bree. The 9 then gathered and pursued him to Weathertop, but were thwarted as Gandalf escaped into the wilds. Soon afterwards, Uwata departed to join Camul and the other raiders, but Dwar, the Witch King, Agherahil, Indur, and Ren attacked the company on Weathertop and succeeded in wounding Frodo. The Nazgûl pursued the fleeing Ringbearer and his compatriots to the Bruinen ford, but the enchanted floodwaters crushed their hopes. Dwar, the third to reach the river, felt the full force of the torrent and lost his black steed. Returning formless to Minas Morgul, Dwar began to reforge his power for Sauron's Great War. Having no time to stay idle in Mordor, the Dog King resumed the search for the One Ring during the coming months. Flying a fell beast, he engaged in the fruitless hunt until the eve of the attack on Gondor. Dwar then flew home to Mordor. Assigned to the main army that gathered at Udun to guard Morannon, he became the Dark Marshal of this force for the time being. Yet, as the forces of Mordor encroached upon Minas Tirith, he went away north to command the army that was to attack Dale and Erebor. Long had the minions harassed King Bran's territories, and so it did not take long until his southern defenses failed, and Dwar's army, consisting of many orcs and the majority of the Easterling army, spilled into the fields about Dale. The defending dwarfs and bardings kept the town intact for many hours, but their spirit broke with the coming of Dwar upon his mighty fell beast. With much bloodshed were the defenders pushed back into Erebor. In the shadow of the lonely mountain's gate, Dain Ironfoot and King Brand held back the minions of Dwar. Although their fight was worthy of greatest song, with the coming of the army's vanguard they were doomed. King Brand fell from a black spell cast by Dwar himself from above, whilst Dain finally fell to the axe of General Caspulmis, leader of the Easterling battalions. Long was the siege of Erebor, for the gates of the underground city were of great strength, and the designs of the dwarf defences kept the evil host at bay, though it was too large and powerful to be subdued. Due to the prolonged siege, did the dwarf miss the Battle of Pelennor Fields, that claimed the lord of the Nazgûl. Before the siege of Erebor was ended, Dwar was recalled to Mordor, where he amassed the legions of Sauron in the Morannon, ready to spring the trap on the host of the Free Peoples under King Elessar and Gandalf. Yet, whilst he was away, the sons of Dain and Brand sallied from the gates, breaking the evil forces, who were dismayed by news of Sauron's defeat in the south. During the Battle of the Morannon, Dwar took part in the aerial fight above the battlefield, and the subsequent flight to intercept the Ringbearer on Mount Doom. The Lord of Dogs finally came to an end, while en route to the Orodruin, for the breaking of the ruling ring unmade his own ring of power, and robbed him of his only link to air. If you like the video, please give it a thumb up and subscribe if you are not already, as each takes just a second to do and will be very much appreciated. For those who want to go the extra mile and support the channel, the Buy Me a Coffee link is in the description below. See you next time.